Michael, thank you for coming on the Easy Pride podcast today.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to be here.
Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so been with Swimlane for about 7 years now, mainly focused on larger enterprises, government clients, and partners, trying to help with their automation journey and experience overall, right? Prior to that, I built a couple of security programs for some public companies, and way before that, I worked for the U.S. government under Department of Defense. Specifically United States Marine Corps. So, once a Marine, always a Marine. That's still me. People can't see me right now, but I still keep my hair fairly short. What happened before that? Yeah, before the Marine Corps, I did IT and network security, so more on the NOC side. Early days of routing and switching and the Cisco days, right?
Hmm.
And way before that, if people having problems understanding what's coming out of my mouth, I migrated from Sweden. So originally born and raised in Sweden. So that is yeah, who I am and kind of, hopefully we'll go in more to what I'm currently doing or what
Yeah.
we're currently doing here at Swimlane.
So what got you interested in IT in the beginning?
I think it was I broke my dad's computer in the early 90s. And he's like, well, you're gonna have to fix it. And that kind of set the path. I did a couple of internships then in Sweden and here in the US as I was going through school. And then finally landed a full-blown job, right, of fixing monitors, printers, computers, and then shifting way focus to remote access and network services. 9/11 then shifted that to more kinetic operations. I think that's a friendly word.
Yeah.
Uh, but as we continue to kind of advance around the globe with our strategic goals and missions, right, operationally and tactically, technology became a bigger piece. So it was always that, hey, tell me, who here has experience with HF, VHF, UHF, IP protocol routing, and like packets and other fun things. So I did what you should never do, right? But I volunteered a lot. And as I wrapped up my tenure with the Marine Corps, you had a choice to make. Do I do the contracting route or work for the U.S. government, continue on that path, or do I kind of take all these uh, very mixed and matched technology, kinetic, force protection, just security in general, and try to go back to the network and cyber information security programs. So I picked the latter, and it has not been a dull day since.
So I'm really curious because you have we'll stick with the phrase a kinetic background. How has that impacted what you do on the virtual the virtual world?
Yeah, so there's almost a curse word in probably the U.S. military called operational risk management. But everything we do and everywhere we went, you would conduct kind of like a limited threat assessment, or sometimes really large scale
Hmm.
if you're doing a major operation. But that threat assessment and risk overall, where we calculated and we did like what's the most likely course of action that we are going to do and that the enemy is going to do, and here's probably what it looks like. So the whole wargaming, sandboxing, tabletopping, um, that hasn't really changed. Some of the TTPs, obviously,
Hmm.
from a defender's point of view, but always thinking like an attacker has really helped out in the public sector and private sector here on the cyber and info side.
So it's the skill set of what would I do if I were trying to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So full gap analysis, looking at our fields of fire, what we can protect, what's our center of gravity, and what are we like really what do we do if the primary fails, so the secondary or the tertiary. So always having contingency of fallback plans when it comes to like that defense in depth.
Yeah, that's interesting that the military experience would actually benefit in the IT space.
Yeah, no, but I think it's also right when we do threat assessments, whether it's third party or internal. Um, if you're able to get through one system, then see, okay, what's the most likely course of action now, or the probable course of action, and then kind of follow that down and see where you can pivot, and then new risk exposure, new risk assessments, and that's continuous. So whether you're doing it from an attacker's or defender's perspective, it's helped me a lot at least.
That's really neat. So before we kind of dig into the meat of this, I want to ask the question that I asked probably most of my guests of have you been a victim of a cybersecurity incident or fraud or scam, either personally, professionally, and can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll do a recent one where my wife, like all of us, do a lot of online shopping, and I'm still a bit of a hobbyist, so have advanced network firewalls here at the house and over the Wi-Fi network. And I was in Europe and received a alert that a firewall, so the IDS IPS had actually ended up blocking, but my wife was on a online shopping store. I'll leave out the name, and had attempted to put in and submit a payment.
Hmm.
And the systems actually worked and blocked that transaction. So that's a success story. I think we all have lots of failures, right? And we
Yeah,
can do a million things right, but we do that one thing less than ideal, then we have other outcomes. So the phishing is still really real,
yeah,
whether it's personal, social media. We always see that, right? I've still fallen for it. You click on a link, or you review a document, or you sandbox something, and then kind of assess and see what they're trying to do. So those have still happened from the corporate perspective and from a personal perspective. But I've been very, very fortunate that I know of. I'm not having any major
yeah,
exposure. Most of them are from public breaches,
yeah,
etc.
yeah. There's not much the public can do about breaches that they have no control over.
Yeah, no, and I'm hoping there's a little bit stronger legislation to that moving forward, where people are held accountable for some of those control failures.
Yeah, right now it's I think we're still at least in the U.S. we're still pretty loosey goosey with what happens after a data breach. It's the obligatory, hey, we'll give you a year of identity theft protection. Oh, great, thanks.
Yeah, but then it's the burden, right, on the individuals of rotating and rolling all their credentials and vaults, and trying to figure out if there's been any secondary impact to their personal or financial status.
Yeah, all very scary things. Um, has your professional background, do you think, has helped you be safer personally in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, we should probably throw my wife on here, because she doesn't, obviously enjoy most of this, but the paranoia, and really having a zero trust mindset has been pretty helpful for us, I think, as a family.
Hmm.
You don't need to access everything in the world, and we should inspect what we expect. So I think, to answer your question very briefly, is just yes, it helps out.
So, if you can't answer this question, that's fine. Has your cybersecurity profession helped? Do you have kids, and has it helped them?
They're really young,
Okay.
but so I think so. But it's also really healthy to see, the Board of Education here where we live. It's very proactive in communications and everything else. So trying to socialize and educate at an earlier age, I think that's awesome. And then if they can then also tap in, or we as professionals can go and provide like advice and assist. It's like, hey, have you thought about this? Or here's a couple of public resources that you can disseminate to the rest of the parent or the student body of do's and don'ts. I think that's super helpful. So we got to all come together and just kind of help each other out a bit.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear different parents' interactions with their kids from the realization of Okay, my cybersecurity paranoia is a little too much for my 5-year-old. I need to figure out how to tone it down and put it on a plane that they can understand without frightening them about life.
Yeah, no, and I like that too. As far as whether it's personal or professional, it's easy to implement technical controls to restrict and kind of try to help mitigate some of the
Yeah,
risk. But every control that you put in often introduces a level of friction,
yeah,
whether that's your wife, your kids, or the company you're working with or for, right? So that's still risk, and you can't go full speed ahead and just stop everything because if productivity goes down, then that's obviously um, might actually be even more risk to the business or to your personal livelihood uh, that then you want to deal with right then and there. So measured approach, small incremental improvements, I think is really huge, and then coupling that with education.
hmm
Um, but just education without any technical controls, I think we've all seen that doesn't really work. So it has to be a good hybrid mesh of the both, I think.
So, how does a company figure out what level of friction is acceptable for their environment? Maybe like a bank might decide, hey, we're okay with tons of friction with our employees, but you're a manufacturing company. If your employees have to spend 20 minutes verifying stuff before they can sit down at their desk, that's probably not a good example, not a good, not productive for the environment. So how does a company sort of figure out where they should be in that model?
Yeah, I think it's important to manage those relationships in the business, right? So interview stakeholders and all the way down to the bottom, the front line. So whether that's your security analysts, your IT team, your inside outside salespeople, the people on the floor in a manufacturing facility. So kind of looking at that human behavior when you test something, hopefully with a smaller test bed or population to see what their reactions, receive feedback, and do those small kind of enumerate across the security space to make sure that you're kind of managing those technical controls. Because above all, people are great, but we're human, and we often use that shortest path. So it's easy to then say like, well, that no, we don't like this. Okay, well, why? How would you like to receive the change?
hmm
So rinse and repeat, and then I mean, it's a bit of a plug here, right? Like automation obviously helps out. We're doing things at higher speed and pace.
Yeah.
So yeah, remove the noise.
So what are some of the risks of automation? Because from my own life, I've realized that if you over automate, that in some cases can reduce its own levels of risks, and if something fails in the automation, it becomes more devastating. So how do you balance what is and what isn't automated when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, we try to focus a lot on what has the biggest impact. So the highest volume and something that has low risk. So if you take care of that first, obviously you then get back what you can't buy, which is time.
hmm
But for every automation that you introduce into your personal or professional life, test it and then build in controls to make sure that it's running. So what happens if it's failing?
Yeah.
How do you get notified? Who is supposed to fix it? And those are really, I mean, they sound basic, but they can become pretty complex tasks of routing them through your organization. But mainly, yeah, focus on the high volume first, and test a lot of it or test all of it for an extended period of time. If that
I,
does that
I,
help answer?
Yeah, yeah. I was chuckling to myself because a long time ago in my career, I had built an automated, let's call it an automated anti-fraud risk platform. And at some point, we started noticing, there's stuff slipping through that shouldn't be slipping through. And I had never built anything to make sure that the automation was staying running. And so at some point it had failed, not alerted anybody, definitely not alerted me until we started seeing the results of it. It's like, oh, okay, I need to. I got to make sure the automation is running. It doesn't help if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to couple with just automation in general is, you know, an example of a bad automation, right? Is garbage in often
Yeah.
equals garbage out. So make sure that you trust, or you at least, as part of zero trust, you then test everything and you make sure that the signals that you're getting are then providing the output, and then you kind of reverse map everything. So a good example, worked with someone many years ago. Keep in mind that when we started the early days of automation, it was Bash, PowerShell, Python scripts that somebody had to feed and maintain. And it was very complex whether you ran on a cron schedule once a day or once a month to help out with some reporting, or if it was trigger based, like, okay, well, what's the trigger? What happens if that trigger fails? Um, to now where it's like low code, we can do it visually. But going back to that example, someone thought it was a good idea to bring in a bunch of low fidelity um, AS and IP blocks. And then they were truly just automated dropping that between their VPCs or virtual networks
Mm-hmm.
from private to public and hybrid clouds, right? And they ended up cutting off one of their own network segments.
Oops.
So, so yeah, really good high quality information in will let you automate more effectively, obviously without those or undesirable outcomes.
Is there a schedule that people should review their automations?
I mean, I would say continuously, right? So for everything that we have automated, we've actually automated monitoring, like synthetics,
Mm-hmm.
to then say, well, this has changed. What are you going to do about it? Or maybe you haven't received all the firewall logs in the last hour, so that means something is either wrong with your SIM or with your signal sources, and then kind of have those journeys mapped out and know who you can then bring in from a collaboration perspective to help fix it.
And then I imagine documentation of those automations has got to be super high importance.
Yeah, that's probably one of the best things that we do, right? Is um, a lot of organizations have pretty decent, like, let's just call them run books. If this, then that.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start with that, even if it's hey, here's a tier one triage task. Here are the 19 things you're going to do if you get something like this. uh, to take that, digitize it, automate it, orchestrate it, whether that's 50%, 70%, 90%, or 100%. Now you already have kind of like the backing documentation to support what you're then automating in those playbooks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good first step, is start with that documentation, interview the people who it impacts, and then figure out how they do it, and then automate it, orchestrate it.
Yeah, because reverse engineering documentation is always a nightmare.
Yeah, whiteboards are great.
We've got the process. We just now we need to figure out to document what it actually has been doing and how long it's been doing it.
Yep. No, so and a lot of the tooling that we have, right, allows you to export your configuration, so
Yeah.
that's easy to kind of transform what you have in your system, and then go from there.
So, what are some of the processes that absolutely should always retain, that at least currently should be retained in the human space?
I think so we use something like risk-based prioritization. So we're very fortunate with the signal sources that we have. We know if it's like a VIP user or a high value asset or customer data, and then what type of data. So we actually started with the data first when we mapped our enterprise and cloud ecosystems. So anything that's customer, obviously confidential, and then you can move up to restricted for financial and other data stores. But that made it easy to then contextualize the priority of these different places of information or source of information. I'm trying not to be too long-winded, but where if any of them come in and they don't match a certain set of parameters, or something that don't try to automate your way around that
Mm-hmm.
at first. So build baselines based upon what you know, but then take that from an automated case, maybe to escalate it to an incident and force people to have eyes on. Especially when it comes to those examples that I mentioned earlier, like service accounts, API keys, rotating authentication, authorization methods. Um, if you mess that up, then the downstream effects can be pretty costly. But at the same time, not doing them or automating 70, 80, 90%, now you're having your teams waste all that their effort
Yeah.
on doing that very mundane, repetitive tasks. So it's definitely a balancing act.
And is it the sort of thing that after there's been a cybersecurity incident, there's probably more human time needs to be spent reevaluating what did we miss, what did the automation not catch?
Yeah, so the after actions, the post blast, like those things, they're often people used to think they're not fun, right? But I always say like what we do for living is it is awesome. Like we get to play with some of the best, or shouldn't say play, we get to utilize some of the best technologies in the world to meet our corporate goals and outcomes that we need to help the business grow, right, and secure our customers and internal enterprise. So that's all fun. So when you do an investigation, that should still be fun. Like come into work Monday is fun. Leaving work on Friday should also be fun. Everything in between should not feel like you're just managing tickets and you're not enjoying that. So those are the things that we generally start first with. What do you not like about your job? And if you have 100 people doing the same 100 tasks a day and they each take 30 seconds, that adds up to money.
Yeah.
So start there and then work your way out.
So where do you see kind of AI being involved in cybersecurity on the defensive side, let's say?
Yeah, no, that's a great segue, I think. So we're fortunate, right? I think our co-founder Cody said something really interesting a while back, and it's changed how I look at it even. So we used to look a lot internally, like, well, how did we build our AI, right? Like, how do we segregate it? How do we separate it? How do we protect it from the wider internet? Like, what are our gateways? How have we trained the data sets? How are we maintaining it? All of those things are obviously really important. But then it's also, well, that's a very singular and focused look at one AI tool where we're recording this now where we can transcribe it and use generative AI to provide a summary
Yeah.
statement automatically. Like that's probably a good use of it, not necessarily security focused, but then let's flip that. So from a security team, one of the costlier things that we do is when we transfer the responsibility or an investigation between language barriers, possibly, or
Yeah.
time zones. So then using AI to translate what you've done, what the next steps are, recommended actions, observations, super powerful. I think most of the tools that we have in our stack has a level of AI/ML on it, right? So it helps do most of the heavy lifting on the signal source side, so that when we get it into our fusion center, it's already has most of the enrichments and context. Now we can then ask, okay, so what? Let's look at the lessons learned the past 100 times that we've done these investigations. What did we do there? So that if we have a junior level analyst triage, one of these cases, or maybe escalate it to an actual incident, a lot of that work and lessons learned can then be rolled up, summarized, and help those individuals out as well.
Do you also see AI being helpful in kind of bridging the gap between the security team and people who are not technically inclined in writing reports and analysis? Hey, take this incident and explain it in a way that a non-technical person would understand.
Absolutely. And we often, if you ask me what I don't necessarily, or what I didn't used to do, like doing the last couple of years, most of it's obviously prior to Swimlane, right? But that was exactly to your point, taking CSV data or structured, unstructured data from 30 different sources, making sense out of them, and then spending 4 to 8 hours in a week to then make that into pivot tables and then present that to the board or the rest of the leadership team. Like that's not good use of time.
Yeah.
Um, but we didn't really often ask too. It's like, well, how would you like to consume this information? And now with AI, say, hey, I'm my name is Mike. I'm the CISO at Swimlane. Please provide a non-technical summary of last observables for the last, the last quarter over quarter, month over month, last year, and then tell people if I'm improving or if we are improving or we're declining or we're increasing mean time to detect and respond. Like, what are these KPIs? Um, that is super awesome. Like to get a summary paragraph that makes sense. Obviously, test it,
Yeah.
make sure that the data is correct in there. But that has now opened up a lot of new doors on how we think about the problem set of translating very technical and security related KPIs to necessarily not security related people.
Do you see places where AI should absolutely not currently be used?
I think an interesting place where we're working quite a bit on. So I'm not going to say should not be used.
It not ready for prime time usage. How about?
Yeah, yeah. So good one is if we go to 100 different customers of ours, right, or 1,000, and we ask them like, how do you do phishing triage, or how do you do EDR or SIM triage? We will get uh, we'll get a baseline of like, oh, here's steps 1 through 5, and then a huge deviation generally in the middle to match their business process, right? And then a lot on the end, like the last mile. Where I think what's going to be interesting, I think in the coming year is how do we use AI to kind of help guide people build out those automations?
Hmm.
Because right now it may capture what 70% of those playbooks should or would look like, but to expect it to do 100% everything that matches your business process, that's not real right now.
Yeah. And that's a bad thing. If someone is promising you that, you should run away.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And yeah, so figure out no matter if the AI is part of your security stack or your general IT or something else, um, figure out what it works really well for, and then see how you can incorporate it, maybe even to your security program, like translation services and other things, right?
Yeah. So where do you see AI impacting security, let's say 5 years down the road?
So I think we're going to continue. I mean, I just came from Black Hat Europe, right, in London, and it's hard to walk uh, 10 feet
Yeah.
without seeing automation and AI on literally under every logo. So then it's seeing, well, how are they using it? Um, how should that be adopted? How can we help educate, uh, our peers, our customers and partners on this is where it works really well. For for as an example, one thing where we've seen huge advancement, right, is the let's just call them virtual analysts. Doesn't mean that you should auto close everything and just
Hmm.
trust AI 100%, but to do that, everything up to the last mile, right, or the last 30 seconds of an investigation, maybe even. Um, those are where I think we're going to continue to see the biggest leaps and bounds, where depending on how everybody's training the data, we should be able to do a lot more automation, a lot more context-based, risk-based, priority-based. Um, I think as far as like, yeah, really the prioritization and closing and figuring out if anomaly X equals Y, then go off and do these other things. But just having AI on its own isn't really going to solve the problem. Like,
Yeah.
you really got to couple it with that human intelligence to match your internal business processes, and then push it all the way to the right. Like, how do we enable those actual human analysts via the virtual analysts?
Is there? I'm maybe grasping at straws here. Uh, is there kind of supply chain risk with AI being used in the security space? In that, hey, if I'm a nation state, if I can manipulate, or introduce bad data into somebody's AI learning, I can get it to do things that it shouldn't be doing, or it's going to leave holes where it shouldn't be leaving holes.
Yeah, I think that, but that in my perspective, that goes outside of AI as
Yeah.
well, right? It's literally every library or package that we import, right? It's okay, what automated processes can we build to make sure that we've tested, we vetted it, and then looking at that the full supply chain and SBOM like in bulk to then make sense out of everything, all the ingredients in your secret, steak or whatever it
Yeah.
is that you're building. Uh, so that's yeah, it's not just for AI, but you're absolutely
Yeah.
spot on. Then trusting AI blindly without having the controls in place would be just as bad as doing it as part of your regular, CI/CD or software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about supply chain issues on AI or even like large language models. Like how would I go about feeding bad data? I mean, like we see the results of. I think we see it in like in the legal space
Yeah.
with AI that it seems to hallucinate pretty specifically in the in the legal space. But it makes me wonder how easy it is to
It's
put content out there that AI will pick up and inappropriately ingest.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it every day, right? So it's just a matter of curating the data and building out those kind of controls and tests around that to see what happens when that gets ingested, um, and then figure out, well, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah,
Um,
that's for other minds other than you and I to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting, right? But it's, yeah, I don't have that 40-pound brain that a lot of the people at our company at Swimlane has, right? So I'll leave that to them. But advice and assist and saying, hey, we saw this on another model.
Yeah,
What are we doing? And then also be specific. If you're building a tool for your customers or consumers, that's security related. I always joke, but like, don't have it trained on how to cook a filet mignon, right? Like it's not necessarily relevant with that data set.
yeah.
So focus on you can reduce a lot of the risk by training it on those specific um, kind of tasks that you want it to respond to or generate information about. And then test that automatically and throw all the wrenches that you can in those systems to see what happens when things don't go as expected.
Do you get to do that as part of your job or your teams of let's try to break the stuff that we've built?
Yeah, so whenever we see things in the wild, it's then really working with our AI ML team, the data scientists, and then, okay, let's see what happens when we do this, right? And I know I just saw on this weekend, AWS has published some really good, or Amazon's published some really good tooling as well on how to test and automate a lot of these.
Fun. So is there anything that we've missed about what Swimlane does and like who your target audience is and why they should use you?
No, we haven't missed anything. I think, I mean, this could be a 4-hour talk, right, or 8-hour talk. I think the biggest thing where we see real value, right, whether it's through human intelligence and or human intelligence mixed with artificial, um, is really the unification, right? Of you can buy all the best platforms in the world and try to solve for we call it good enough, right? But that good enough may not be good enough.
Hmm.
But it's easier to manage one massive platform that does everything for you. Where I think we're uniquely placed in the market is, well, we work with anyone and anything. It doesn't even necessarily have to have an API, right? We can reach in and get data from almost any data source, and we can affect and then impact in OT, IT, fraud, and all these different ecosystems to get the desired outcomes and automate those via our orchestration engines to execute the tasks on behalf of a human. Um, and then kind of marry and merge all that into ultimately, at the end of the day, as a business, what are we trying to do? We're trying to manage risk.
Yeah.
So if we're managing risk and we have all these, regulators saying, well, show me evidence of all of this. Well, if you've orchestrated everything really well, and now you're talking to these bespoke identity providers or cloud ecosystems and MSPs and MDRs and EDRs and sorry, I can have a very long list of acronyms, right? But let's just call them signal sources. Is then given the or providing the ability to unify them where you don't have to train your teams from an IT security or risk perspective to know 30 different tools, like train them to know your tool. So if you do replace your EDR, is there even a user experience change? Or is it, hey, we received a signal, Mike visited a website with poor reputation and clicked on a link that downloaded a payload, and we isolated his endpoint as an example, right? That doesn't change from vendor X, Y, and Z. So abstracting all of that and allowing them to do more with less, that's really the real value, I think, of orchestration automation. I could add more to that, but unification of all of these is really where the most fun is, because now we can draw business intelligence data out of that. Like year over year, if you did replace a SIM vendor or EDR or something like that, did our efficiencies increase? Okay, and then why is that? Did we reduce OpEx or CapEx? Okay, now we can get two good things and then present them to the rest of the leadership team and the board or investors, and then go from there saying, hey, we're making real progress here.
Okay, maybe that discussion made me think of a question. Because you're overseeing, you're involved with multiple customers. Do you see any interesting trends in the data of, we're seeing a lot of this that we haven't seen before?
No, I think it's just a steady increase of pretty much everything. And I know that's a horrible answer. Obviously, CSPM, vulnerability management, like it's hard to say this is the most important thing that you should focus on. But I do see we obviously see a lot of targeted attacks as well. So I think it's more on being able to build out some sort of attribution, because then you can figure out, well, what are they really trying to get to? So the TTPs, and you may not get it if you just if you have an EDR team and an identity team and a SIM team and some other team and they don't work together, right? And you don't have the luxury of running something like Swimlane. Now you have all these really smart, brilliant teams working in silos.
Yeah.
By unifying them together, now you can pull all those needles out of many different haystacks and then make sense out of them all, and maybe learn something that you wouldn't see from a singular plane.
Yeah. Other people can see interesting. It's when you've I love the analogy I'm thinking of, when you've played one of those games where you're trying to find the words in the little boxes, and I forget what a word search.
Yeah.
That once you've been looking at that word search and you can't find any more words, someone comes over, looks at your shoulder, and goes, "Oh, well, I see this one, this one, this one, and this one," because they haven't been looking at the same data that you have. That magically they could just see things that you've missed.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with IT, right? And OT is bridging all these gaps and kind of getting rid of the silos. I mean, we have a use case that we run is all the RFID, the key cards, into our office and secure like rooms and facilities. They actually go up to our Fusion Center as well. So now you can actually track a maintenance person coming in. And if you then see that they try to gain access or did gain access into a room, which they obviously shouldn't, now you start seeing network anomalies and identity things, right? Now it's like, okay, well, now you can trace back from a physical perspective all the way through, and that helps out with the investigation. And you don't have to then go and pivot and submit a ticket to IT and say like, hey, give me the last 90 days, all the access and audit logs from our physical security system, because it's already part of all the information that's been normalized and enriched into your investigation.
That new contractor Bob walked into the server room, and all of a sudden, lots of things started happening that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, they unplugged that red cable and yeah.
We need to go have a conversation with Bob.
Mm-hmm.
So, if people want to reach out and have a conversation with you, where can they find you in Swimlane online?
Yeah, so the best bet is swimlane.com. We have some excellent, blog posts, and we'll probably we can share some of these links with you here in a bit. We There's so much content, right? So it's a good thing to use our swimlane.com kind of front end to narrow down the search on what you're interested in learning more about, whether it's just IT operations, security operations, OT and fraud and all the other like vulnerability management use cases, or just risk and compliance as well. It's like, how can we help you automate what you don't like doing?
Let's have a conversation afterwards. There's lots of stuff in my life I don't like doing.
Yeah, there you go.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your insights and what you bring to the table.
Thank you, Chris. It's been my pleasure.